How's it going, everyone? My name's Graham, and welcome to Two Left Thumbs. This is my review of the Jackbox Party Pack 8, the 2021 installment of the yearly party game collection. At the top of this video, I want to talk about the general quality of the pack, some of the broader additions that they made, and maybe who this might appeal to. Then I'll go into each of the games, and I'll review and share my thoughts on each of them individually. I'll use timestamps, so if you only care to hear the individual game summaries, then absolutely skip ahead in the video. I imagine most people clicking this video already know the appeal, but for those new to the series, Jackbox is a multiplayer experience that can be played in person or remotely, with only one copy of the game ever needed and 0 controllers. Everyone joins in by opening up a browser and going to jackbox.tv. This works through pretty well any device. Phone, tablet, computer, no apps required. You just go to that link and join in through the host's given room code. It's so quick, so easy, and such a large appeal for any party setting. Over the last year and a half or so, the game has exploded, reaching new heights for an already popular series. I think Jackbox 7 was a bit too far in development to quite see the extent of that last year, but I think that extra revenue and funding is reflected in the overall quality of this pack in ways that are readily apparent. Outside of the individual game's own enjoyableness, there are even more detailed animations, more random add-ins and gags, and more polish throughout than ever before. I've commended specific games in the past for having these goofy and creative credit songs. This year, every one of the 5 games got a unique credit song. Listening through each of those is a delight, and it's a really simple way of showing how much extra they were able to put into Jackbox 8. Looking just in the main menu, I genuinely like the addition of having these time estimates as well as content summaries for each game. This one's drawing oriented, this one's a little shorter, this one is chance based. That sort of information can be huge when trying to make a decision of what to play. And now that they have it here, I kind of wish it existed in every pack. It's such a simple but much appreciated thing to layer in. Carrying on something I started doing last year, I want to separately consider the quality of these games based on how enjoyable they are in person through live streams or over a remote call. And hopefully that helps inform your purchase depending on how you plan to play this game. This is something I state pretty well every time, as with all Jackbox Party Packs. While the individual games will often allow for a minimum of 2 or 3 players, most of the games will only really be enjoyable with at least 5 or 6. And the closer you can get to 8, the better. Otherwise, your matchups are a little too limited, the social deduction modes are totally shattered, and the smaller pool of potential laughs and general contributions will noticeably lessen the experience. Sometimes you can get away with 4, but 5 or 6 really seems to be that golden turning point. I do want to point out that the smallest maximum player count any game in this pack has is 8. Usually there's at least one game that maxes out at 6 or even 4 players. Then someone in the room has to awkwardly sit out, or you have to put off playing that game until someone leaves. There's always that one overly courteous friend who wants to sit out for a round. I'm looking at you, Kirk. You don't have to be that polite. Allowing for higher max players across the board didn't go unnoticed. I think with more people playing these games remotely than ever, you more commonly have larger pools of people playing together, and that alone makes this pack great to have on those game nights where you do end up with 7 or more people. And I would say none of the games requires 10, it's just nice to have as an option. That 5 to 8 range is still fantastic, and you'll have a great time. I specifically want to point out and laugh at the everything is a cake pack theme. I always love seeing the new themes for these menus and the game icons. I don't know if this was meant to be a riff on the secret cake meme from last year, or if it just felt like something new they hadn't done before, but I enjoyed it on both levels. Across all the games, I do wish that extended timers per game would tell you what the time difference would be when activating them. Usually it doesn't make that big of a difference, and I've never really thought that hard on it. But this year specifically, I ended up sending this to them as a piece of feedback after streaming the game. Weapons drawn flew up from 200 to 400 seconds. Someone joining in went AFK, and we sat around for nearly 7 minutes waiting to see if they would rejoin. I never would have turned on extended timers if I would have known we'd be stuck waiting around for that amount of time. It's a simple thing, and I hope it gets patched in the near future. One more handy feature they added for streamers: when you boot up the game, if you simply press the up arrow on your keyboard, the game will verbally dictate the room code.
Your room code is B-I-F-N
Time to look at each of the 5 individual games, laying out how each game plays and feels, the different gameplay, mechanics, and features, scoring them one by one, and summarizing my overall thoughts on the pack at the end. First up is Drawful Animate, made for 3 to 10 players. This will be a nice easy one to go over. This is the 3rd iteration of one of the all-time best Jackbox games. It started back in Jackbox 1 and returned as a standalone sequel between packs 2 and 3. So it's been over 5 years since we saw the return of this sexy little owl. Animate actually raises the max player count to 10, whereas previous Drawfuls only allowed for 8. So that's an immediate bonus. The premise of all Drawful games is simple. Everyone in the room is given a unique and quirky prompt. Everyone draws a picture to match that prompt with limited colors and no eraser. The group is then shown these pieces of art one at a time. Everyone then crafts a response of what they thought that artist's original prompt may have been. The goal for the artist is to draw a picture well enough that others in the room are able to guess which prompt they were drawing off of. The goal of everyone else is to craft a lie convincing enough to steal away points. Every time someone guesses your lie as being that artist's original prompt, you make off with some sweet points. It's pretty well endlessly entertaining and a staple of Jackbox. The updates made in Drawful Animate, besides the raised player limit, include an expanded color palette. In Drawful 1, you had 1 color. In 2, you had 2 shades of the same color. Here, everyone gets black plus 2 random colors. Still no eraser, but you potentially have a bit more to work with that one small change alone. Next, you actually have to draw 2 pictures for each prompt. These paired images become 2 frames of a looping animation. Luckily, the game onion skins the first drawing for you, so you can more easily match up with your original drawing to create more of an animated effect without kind of guessing what your first drawing looked like. When your animation is presented, you can choose from 5 speed options to better emphasize the loop in a way that matches the intended action. When we played, some players opted to create 2 separate, unrelated images to tell a mini story. And honestly, that storyboard approach worked quite well as an alternate to the intended animations. It still felt in the spirit of the game, because it's equally as tricky to sum things up into 2 pictures as it is with 2 frames of an animation. Once per game, you can now double down, although this isn't Kentucky Fried. This option comes in when guessing which prompt matched the image. If you had applied the double down and were correct, you will now gain 2 times the points. Guess wrong and you instead feed the liar 2 times the points. We've seen similar mechanics in other Jackbox games, and it feels welcome over in Drawful. If you're streaming, the audience will also participate in votes. Just so things don't get out of whack, if you had hundreds or thousands of audience members, points are awarded based on the percentage of the audience who were able to vote. So that input can easily and dramatically affect the outcome of the game. In any prompt-based game in Jackbox, if you play it a little too often, you run the risk of growing familiar with the existing prompts, making it a lot harder for people to trick you with a lie. So the ability to create your own can alleviate that, and a featured content section will include Jackbox-made content that fits specific themes, holidays, or other timed events. You might ask yourself, is this new Drawful any better than the 2 that came before? And I think the number one thing it comes down to is the prompts. I don't know if the Jackbox team ran tests or reviewed footage or what they were doing, but they really cracked the code on how to make these prompts appear the way that people typically lie in Drawful, rather than some obtuse specific thing that stands out as something that likely came from the Jackbox creators. In the old versions, there would usually be one standout word, a particular phrasing, or some other giveaway once you got used to seeing their writing style. Here they included typos, little emojis, layered, specific, confusing responses that ensure that the drawings end up so mangled and haphazard that everyone's attempted lies are going to end up getting mixed in really well. That gives a great boost to an already fantastic game. Other simple additions like infinite timers for the hardcore artists out there is also welcome. It's totally optional, so why not include it? Because everything here is drawing and text oriented, this this one works equally well locally, remotely, and through streaming. There's not a lot to say. It's giving us more of one of the franchise's most beloved games. Is it better? That comes down to personal taste. I would say it's different enough to feel fresh, and that's what really matters. So up alongside Drawful 1 and 2, it's still like a 10 out of 10 from me. Next up is the Wheel of enormous proportions for 2 to 8 players. Seeing as Jackbox started with You Don't Know Jack trivia games, any form of trivia is essential to the series. 5 out of 8 packs feature some form of trivia, with the Wheel, as I'm going to call it, being an entirely new take on the format. This is thanks to the ways it mixes in a large amount of random chance that would make Nintendo 64 era Mario Party quake in their little booties. The entire game can and likely will flip upside down more than once. I was getting these really serious Hitchhiker's Guide vibes, thinking the big wheel reminded me of Deep Thought, and then he went and directly quoted that series.
Play my trivia game, and I give you the answers to life, the universe, and everything?
And I was kind of ecstatic. At the start of each round, everyone submits a question, much like you would a Magic 8 Ball. This has no impact on the game and exists entirely for a silly payoff at the end. A great part of Jackbox is seeing the different avatars they choose, and I especially love the cute little meeples in this game. Having a snarky, all-knowing Wheel crack wise is delightful.
That is embarrassing.
It's like they're hosting their own game show based on themselves, starring themselves. As opposed to You Don't Know Jack or Trivia Murder Party, these are never multiple choice questions. There are instead a multitude of different question types. Several include having 12 options on screen and you must select all that apply, or the return of this or that, taken from Jackbox Games of old. The Wheel may give a series of increasingly specific clues to get you to guess the word they are thinking. You type out and submit, scoring extra points for being fastest. Yet another option is being given 2 lists and needing to match up as many of them as you can. With so much more to worry about than A, B, C, D, these questions can feel fast and be pretty difficult. Performing well, getting more correct answers, or finishing more quickly than others will earn you slices for the Wheel. At the end of every 3 questions, the top player will be granted a power slice. If you're streaming this, during this trivia portion, the host is going to have a bit of an advantage. You may not notice in a low latency setting like a shared screen Discord call, but if it's taking 5 to 10 seconds for live streaming players to catch up with the host, they'll have a little bit of extra time with each question, and if it ever comes down to something timing based, they're going to have the added advantage of hearing the new clues first. So things really tip in the host's favor. Now, after that 3rd question, we take a break from the trivia portion and swap to the chance portion of the game. Each player places their available slices around the wheel. 2 players can place on the same space, but if that is the one that is spun, they will have to split the resulting point pool. You also have the option to double down and place multiple slices on one wheel segment, although you won't know where anyone else has placed their slices until the spinning begins, so it's really just luck, with minimal strategy. That shred of strategy comes in because there are specialty wheel slices, ones that grant 2 times multipliers, or ones where points are given to players on either side of that slice. You can try to make use of these, but know that other players are probably also planning to play on or around them. So there's a bit of mind games and critical thinking that can play out there. There is a reserved space for the power slice, which if landed on will earn that player points and play out a chance time-like minigame that often utterly breaks the game. They could swap points between any 2 players or allow them a few additional slices to increase their chances at winning on each spin. There are a multitude of others, mostly ones messing up players' points. Players take turns spinning the wheel, adding to the overall pot of points with each spin. When a space has been landed on once in a round, it then instead becomes another power slice. Once a power slice has been activated, all power slices become skulls. If the spinner lands on one of these, that player loses some points and everyone else splits the pot. You can see how chaotic this can be and how chance-oriented it is, right? This is really where the real game is taking place. The winner absolutely will be decided when spinning this wheel. Every time a player takes a spin, there is a point pot total that is filled up. If nobody has crossed a threshold of 20,000 points by the time this pot is filled, then we go back and do 3 questions worth of trivia. We then continue to cycle through these 2 portions of the game until someone wins. Once 1 or more players reach 20,000 points, we move instead to the winner's wheel. They have a chance to spin to win the entire game. If they miss their chance, they instead lose their turn and are temporarily out of the running, until such time as they earn a new set of points or re-reach 20,000 if they had dropped below at some point. One of the times we played, we got stuck in this crazy loop with multiple extra rounds of trivia and wheel spinning. Nobody could land on that winner's slice. The game was nearly over so soon and it just kept going. That added a lot of excitement and meant anybody could win, even with points being added and subtracted like crazy every few turns. But it does mean that the estimated game length only applies to a typical round, so beware that if you have some bad luck, this game is going to spike in how long it takes to play. Once a winner is declared, they have the honor of placing their question in front of the wisdom wheel for a final determination. It's silly, it's worth a laugh. If you were streaming and playing with an audience, they will vote on who they think will win each round of trivia. If they are correct, they can earn their own slice to participate in the chance portion of the game, and further affect the outcome. If their specially placed slice is landed on, the spinner still wins the pot, but the audience now gets to vote on some way to mess with the players. It's nice to have a trivia game in this pack, but it's an odd combination to wrap it up in a game that makes your trivia knowledge near meaningless. At one point, I was in the lead and had my points swapped with the bottom, so I was punished for doing well and they were rewarded for struggling. Maybe I'm just a little bitter over that still, but I think it's best that you all know going in what a crapshoot this game really is. Sometimes you want a crapshoot, and that can be tons of fun. It's a huge portion of what makes Mario Party enjoyable. And obviously doing well in the trivia does still affect the game. You'll have more slices to place on the wheel to earn points, you're more likely to earn that controlling power slice, but one slip up and you could really lose it all. If you love trivia, you might enjoy that aspect, but this game is really much more made for people who would rather just see pure and utter chaos. For me, it's carried by its fun premise, general zaniness, and the fact that the random elements actually make it more accessible than some trivia games. You didn't know the answer to a single question? You still have a shot. But the fact that everything you've done can be zapped away so easily does drag it back down. It's hard to reconcile those two sides of this game. The good news is that this game plays equally well across all options, and it kind of averages out to maybe a 7.5 out of 10. It's fun, and it's a new form of trivia for these packs, but it's also barely a trivia game. Third is Job, made for 3 to 10 players. And that joke has already gotten old. My initial experience with Job was quite poor. I actually had to completely rewrite this section of the review after playing with people over a call rather than just by myself in a stream. This has been boosted up to be one of the best of Party Pack 8, despite a few grievances. It's a relatively simple game. The head-to-head style answers will look a lot like Quiplash, but as you'll soon see, the game is more limiting in a way that allows it to occupy a space outside the Quiplash series. One way to think of it is bridging the gap between pure wit games like Quiplash and word-oriented games like Joke Boat or Madverse City. It's both freeform and entirely limited. The game has a very fun art style, great theme, loads of Jackbox character references, and the hilarious mechanic of the audience creating these motivational posters that show up on screen. Job also deserves massive props for integrating the late 90s and early 2000s craze of word art into the game menus and tutorials. That was legitimately a stroke of genius for an office setting based game. Whoever put that in really earned some security for their job with that. The premise is that the players are applying for the same job and must undergo an interview. There is an opening setup round that takes place before the actual questions roll in. During this portion, everyone responds to icebreaker questions with answers that are a minimum of 5 words long. These responses are then chopped up to create the word banks other players will use for the first actual round of the game. They also have the ability to use words from within the question, which helps make the responses feel vaguely more directed. You win points for winning the matchup, and you earn additional points if your words were used in a winning response. Looking at those icebreakers, the comprehensibility of your response, or any humor you might have tried to lace into it, will likely be lost once everything is chopped up. Although maybe it was funny enough that people will try to reuse it more or less how you originally wrote it out. But that means providing interesting responses in that icebreaker round is only ever indirectly rewarded. Maybe you can see how that ends up being out of balance? It's a little too disposable for my taste, but that might just be my quiplash-loving mindset getting in the way. This setup round does not take a lot of time. When you're playing, it is critically important that players are willing to commit absurd answers to that setup, as it will make for a far better playing experience. Having a word bank of 30 words to work with will have so much more interesting results than 10 words. That's a problem that should really be resolved in-game and not be some sort of pact you make with the other players when the round starts. They could raise the point rewards to encourage longer and better responses, or maybe in the settings there should be an option to turn up the minimum character or word count. When I played on stream, it was hard to agree or influence people, and a lot just submitted that 5-word minimum. It didn't leave a lot of room for creativity or anything that surprising. Playing with a group of friends, we encouraged everyone to use as many of that 140 character limit as possible, and we had far more enjoyable results. The final round was perhaps my favorite part. The prompts were so much simpler that it was easier to give condensed non sequitur answers that didn't feel like forced rambling nonsense. Others disagreed with me, preferring the standard rounds, but no one disliked either, as is sometimes the problem with final rounds in these packs. I just thought this particular round seemed to function more smoothly, had more interesting results, and I enjoyed the ability it provided to deliver your own 1-2 setup and punchline. Based on the reaction of people I played with, as well as those chiming in the audience and chat, this seemed like it was most people's favorite. People wanted to play more rounds of this or the Wheel. The players were a little more iffy on the Wheel. The audience really liked both these games. Perhaps they just like the chaotic nature of that other one, but it makes sense that they would want more Job because it by far has the most audience involvement. They get to vote on their favorite responses in every matchup, handing out a healthy amount of points, and while players are typing out their responses, they get to goof around and collaboratively craft these motivational posters. This is the #1 game in this pack that's going to come down to who you're playing with. My first attempt was me hosting with other players filled in with audience members. That's when I had originally scripted a long rant about how the game went sideways. Then I joined the Wholesomeverse crew for their live stream, and we had a blast. We were rolling around laughing, and this game went from being at the bottom of my list to something that I would happily play again and again. But I would not recommend streaming it unless you have at least a few other people in the room with you that you know. Otherwise you risk frustratingly limited word banks, frequent rounds with no submissions, and becomes more of a struggle with a rough response with nobody in the room to laugh with. On more than one occasion, I've played Quiplash with people who feel that game is too high pressure, and that they're concerned they aren't funny enough for the game. Although, usually the people who say that do end up being quite funny. Anywho, instead, you maybe just feel played out on the Quiplash series and want a change up of that formula. If you fall into either of those two categories, you will love this game. Some of the guys in the Wholesomeverse even said they liked it more than Quiplash. There was actually a great quote from Pentahybrid after playing, in regards to those icebreakers getting broken apart and restructured, actually complimenting that system, and the fact that the quality of your answer didn't matter that much. He said, "There's a freedom to fail and play with language." I thought that was kind of beautiful. It reminds me of last year's talking points. Everyone playing along knows these answers were crafted with major limitations. So when a response is a jumbled mess that didn't quite come together, you can all laugh together rather than the laughs relying on a quality joke being delivered. The game technically functions the same no matter how you're playing it, but I think my scoring here is going to be a little off. When streaming, the answers, the word bank, the commitment from the players, and the consistency really suffered, but it's a powerhouse of audience involvement, so there's pros and cons. I still think it was a lesser way to experience this game. Overall, it's just so much better with people. The experience is better, the laughs are better, and the failures are made better as they themselves become funny. Streaming this one alone with chat filling out the players and audience was a 5. Streaming with friends and an audience was a 9. Playing with people in the room or friends on a call, even without an audience, is still going to be a strong 8 or 9. So my overall score for this one sits at about an 8.5. Take that with a grain of salt because based on early reviews, this is most people's favorite. Hopefully my little gripes didn't sour anyone too much on what can be a really great Jackbox experience. Next we have the Pole Mine, made for 2 to 10 players. First off, wow! While something like Job Job revisits an old art style, the Pole Mine is wholly unique. They've never had a game in this style and it stands out in the best possible way. It's bold, fresh, silly, pleasant, I really love it. I've been wary of polling-based games ever since the dreadfully boring bracketeering, but oh man, this one was a surprise. The Pole Mine is instead a spiritual successor to Guespionage, a game that I think gets too much hate and really deserved a sequel. There was some obvious room for improvement. It was typically agreed that some of the Guespionage results were just confusing, but this new game really fixes that in a brilliant way. The polls you're referring to are being conducted within the group. It's not about guessing how hundreds of strangers may have responded to these questions, second guessing yourself, oh, was this poll done in the States? Were they asking mostly men, mostly women? Instead, you just have to wonder how the very people you're playing with responded. I love the series of titles for these different cave stops. The original series, the next, it's all just silly and good fun. I hope whoever put that in there is super proud of themselves, because I'm proud of ya. You are split into 2 teams, both trying to deduce the poll answers to escape the cave and stop an evil witch. Even the process of voting for team names was good fun. You're given a questionnaire that you must rank in order of preference. The game will ask you to pick your top 3 or 4 answers, which then contribute towards the final group ranking that is kept private for now. The game then requires you to predict certain orders and rankings using that group data. It could ask for the top 3 or the bottom 3. I love when it mixed things up and asked for answers 2 through 4, so it's not just about knowing the random order of the top 3 responses. You now actually have to predict the top 4 with an absolute confidence in first place. That makes things much trickier and opens up some really thrilling and really engaging debate. And hearing people's responses to those questions is just incredible. The game simultaneously encourages you to test the limits of what you know about the people you're playing with, while also learning a little bit about the people you're playing with. So in person or through remote calls, it is absolutely a standout of this pack. Guessing correctly earns you a torch, incorrectly snuffs out a torch. In the final round, you must open doors from least to most popular. You can lose torches here, but cannot gain. Once you are out of torches, the other team can eliminate you for good with a final correct guess. So it all becomes like Guespionage meets Family Feud, and I am all here for that. Just keep Steve Harvey away from me. The funny thing with this live chatter and debates is that you know you're feeding the opposing team all this info. We never tried to split the room in a way where we're actually isolated from one another. You could easily do that and it would be a ton of fun. It's competitive, but has this near cooperative, we're all in it together quality that made it an absolute riot. This game really heavily favors whoever goes first. They simply have more correct options to choose from. They could attempt to address this with having both teams submit their answers head-to-head simultaneously. Maybe that's an alternate mode, make the timers a little longer and it's a live debate that everyone is taking part in, or you could still take turns but have the teams work on opposite tasks. One team tries to guess 1 through 3 while the second team tries to guess 5 through 8. It still requires some level of understanding of how the group would have voted. What do you think they would like the absolute most or the absolute least? Then you're not directly interfering with each other's potential to get a correct answer. I really like this game, but I can already see places for improvement. I do have to admit, some of the questions are a little heady. Your own answers were probably a little bit of a random assortment, and so were your friends. You can try to get into their mind and figure out the ranking, but it's going to be tough. There's one particular game mode that should have a lot of potential that I need to dig into a little and really expose as being a major flaw in this game. I played the streamer mode, which is one of the most audience-friendly modes a Jackbox game has ever had. All 8 players end up on one team, and the rest of the audience form their own. The game plays the same as usual, meaning that the audience isn't just manipulating points or contributing side gags, they are actively playing to win. In my mind, this game has great streaming potential specifically for this mode, although it'll always be a slightly lesser experience without those live debates. My biggest complaint that I've already submitted to the team saying they basically need to patch this is that the streamer mode somehow did not make the game stranger friendly, meaning they left in poll questions of who in the room is the best dancer, taking from the list of the 8 active players. Maybe if you're someone like Polygon or Drawful streaming with 8 people that the audience knows, that could work, or at the very least thinks they know. I don't like the way that encourages weird parasocial relationships with streamers, but that's a highly specific circumstance. What is instead much more likely is you'll have the single host streaming the game playing with 7 strangers who just happen to tune in. So now everyone has to guess while they make their ranking who is the best dancer out of 8 people they don't know, and then in the following round, players then have to guess what eventual ranking we ended up with, despite everyone just ranking things randomly. So now every single guess is a complete stab in the dark, and it led to this horrifyingly drawn out 10-minute final round where we went back and forth guessing unknowable options. It was pure luck, it totally fell apart. It was the most frustrating experience of the night. A question like this is fun in person and reminds me of the previous games Role Models or Fibbage 3 Enough About You. It's about seeing how well you know your friends and how much we all agree on the group dynamics. But it was a streaming disaster. This needs to be addressed. I'll pin a comment if there's ever a patch that fixes it. When I had the chance to play this just with people I knew, working our way up from the bottom in that final round, we did still get a little bit stuck, burnt through our torches super quickly, and it felt like the ending was a little abrupt. I still really enjoyed the process, think it's a great premise, talking through it was really lively, and then it was just kind of cut short. I don't think there's much to change there though. Some rounds are going to have more back and forth than others, that's going to come down to the players in the question, not so much the game. The game works best in person, although it's pretty darn good remotely as well. Mostly the game needs that live chat to create those lively debates. You can kind of still get that through a stream chat, but it's not the same. And the idea of players versus audience is just incredible, but considering this one broken feature, it ironically becomes worse to stream with streamer mode. There's so much potential. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me. It doesn't seem like many are big fans of this one. I think right now maybe it sits at around a 6, maybe pushing towards a 7. If they balance the game a bit so it doesn't so heavily favor the first player, easily a 7. And if they make it so that the streamer mode is, something you can actually play online and stream with strangers, then it could get pushed up to like an 8 or 9. It's just a little unfortunate and a bit of a disappointment because I do really like the game, but I just don't know if people are going to reach for this one very often. But people also didn't really like Guespionage, and I always did. So that could be an excellent litmus test for whether or not the poll mine is for you. Weapons drawn for 4 to 8 players. Brace yourselves. Weapons Drawn is likely the most complicated Jackbox game ever made. Big breath here. We have our second drawing game of the pack, something we've never had 2 of in one pack before, and it also fills the role of being the latest Jackbox social deduction game, following in the footsteps of games like Fakin' It and Push the Button. This one is a murder mystery where every player is both a detective and a murderer. As the game puts it, it's very efficient. It's less about the group rooting out one hidden suspect, and instead is based around everyone killing and trying their best to match up as many murderers to their victims as possible. It's going to take a while just to explain, let alone give any feedback on. That is going to be a major turnoff to so many people who just want to quickly boot up these games, get people playing with no real exposition, and just start having laughs. Maybe it's nice to have this type of variety, but this game is a lot. One letter is taken out of each player's name, and they are forced to integrate that into their pictures. This is your calling card. You're forced to draw 2 murder weapons based on 2 prompts given. Both pictures are using that same letter and shape. It's also possible for more than one player to have the same calling card. I never encountered that, but I imagine it would make it very tricky. After all weapons are drawn, each player must then name an accomplice. You can name them literally anything, but you want to do your best not to draw attention to yourself. If you made your detective Batman, maybe don't name your accomplice Robin. Unless, of course, someone else named their accomplice Robin to try and place suspicion on you over themselves. When the actual game begins, the host sees that you brought a gift. The game selects one of your 2 weapons to put out on display for all players to see. This collection of weapons represents every weapon prompt that was included in this round. And since we know that any given player would not have a duplicate prompt, this now automatically absolves them of murders committed with their revealed weapon. For example, I had foul magics revealed, so I should never be accused of a murder committed with foul magics, as I observably did not have that weapon available to murder with. You can scan through these images looking for any sign of a letter within. You know it has to be one of the letters in their name. Numbers are excluded. If you try to be clever and make your name numbers only, the game gives you a title like Doctor or Professor to make sure there are still letters to be chosen. The named accomplices are paraded out and the party begins. The lights go out and the murdering takes place. Everyone chooses an accomplice they wish to murder. After you've selected that accomplice, you must also guess who brought them to the party. This portion is mostly guesswork, but maybe you know your friends well enough to identify a weird joke or just their sense of humor in general and can pin an accomplice to them. If you throw out a random guess between accomplice and detective, you'll be on a 5-second timeout, but it will give you a clue to try to help you track down the correct detective. Choosing an accomplice and correctly guessing who brought them results in a successful murder. But you leave that remaining weapon you had at the scene of the crime. The lights come back on and we have a whole pile of murders. Successfully killing one of these accomplices earns you points. There are other points to be earned, both by catching murderers and not getting caught. The game selects 2 crimes at a time. It shows how many murder attempts were made on their life. You actually earn points by having more attempts made on your accomplice, so you sort of want to be murderable. You decide as a group which case feels most solvable. Players can choose to rush the timer if they want to lock in a vote or are worried the conversation is tipping towards themselves getting caught. We see the name of the victim as well as the murder weapon left behind. When first playing, everyone got very confused in this first round and often assumed they needed to narrow things down by matching colors. It's counterintuitive, but the colors do not help you in that way. Instead, they match up the weapon types. So every marble statue is drawn in orange. If the murder weapon left behind is this orange marble statue, then you can quickly rule out anyone else who drew in orange, since we know they would never have drawn 2 marble statues. That was a tough one. People were very confused and had a lot of miscast votes for that reason. The detective who brought the guest of the chosen murder is Chief Investigator. They can use a magnifying glass to zoom in on portions of the screen. When playing with people you know, this could be useful, but I generally found it annoying and thought it got in the way more often than anything else. If you cannot achieve a majority vote, then there is a hung jury, and we move on to the next pair of murder cases. If you accuse someone as a group, but they were innocent, only those who correctly voted for the guilty player earn any points. If you successfully accuse a player, and they were in fact guilty, then anyone who casts their votes on them will earn points, and everyone who got it wrong gets nothing. We then conduct another round with new weapons and new accomplices and more cases to be solved. In that second round, you remain with the same weapon revealed. You'll draw with 2 alternate versions of your same letter, and you pick which of your 2 new weapons to use. I kind of wish this was a hard mode toggle, because some of the cursive letters are so scribbly that they either stand out like crazy or just create chaotic mess on the screen. And if I'm being totally honest with myself, if I take my time, I know my cursive, but not quickly enough to be able to say, oh yeah, that's a lowercase s, and now I need to go find the capital letter printing S somewhere in this other picture. Our success rate was already terrible. Throw in cursive and we didn't have a chance. At the end of the game, there is a more rapid-fire cold case segment where we come back to unsolved murders from earlier in the game. Maybe you've gathered enough information to figure it out this time around, but at this stage in the game, I found that you'll likely have to have remembered so much information that you've probably entirely lost track of who is guilty of what, who has already been accused or found guilty, what's left to suss out. Here, you'll win points for correctly guessing or for fooling others. The winner is then determined based on points scored for solving cases, fooling the most players, and having the most murder-worthy accomplices. The audience also seemed to vote on what cases to solve. They didn't really seem to contribute anything meaningful to the game, so this one felt almost entirely pointless from an audience perspective. Definitely something in the strike column against this game. It took that long just to explain how the game is played, and I bet many people are still confused. Bidiots, a very old drawing game from this franchise, was always a tough one to play because you had to warn everyone that they likely would lose the first round. Luckily, rounds of that game only took 20 minutes, you only had a few rules to learn, people would get the hang of it, and you can try again. It then becomes one of the more enjoyable drawing games. Weapons Drawn takes around 40 minutes, and I only finally understand all the ins and outs of the game when I took the time to slowly scrub the footage for the sake of scripting out this video. My own opinion, looking at the chat and looking at comments on other videos, most people will come out of a 40-minute game not really knowing what they just did. This game is lacking in that I generally found everything to be both too slow and too fast. It took forever for the game to get going, and once it did, the timers flew by without enough opportunity to both discuss as a group or to look thoroughly through the photos for clues. The game demands that you split your attention, but doesn't grant enough time to do either. If you add extended timers, the game takes forever. Odds are you won't fit in all 5 games into an evening. If you play with shortened timers, and people choose to rush the timer, which on stream they pretty well always did, then the game is too fast and hectic to learn anything meaningful to build each individual case. I love the concept. I also enjoy the idea that it doesn't put the pressure on only 1 or 2 players to be the liars and try to deceive everyone. That can be stressful. Instead, your pictures do the lying for you and saves you from constantly deflecting, and the spotlight will soon be elsewhere anyway. From a social deduction game perspective, this fills a unique niche in that regard. You get to be a murderer and a detective, you get to try to fool others while also trying to solve the mystery. Being able to play both sides at once kind of puts you at ease. So it deserves major props for identifying that most social deduction games aren't treated in a way that feels a little more casual, without the pressures of lying to everyone. But the game was too difficult to learn or teach. The game length felt both too short and too long. So unless you are Jackbox diehards who play these games all the time and are willing to play a lengthy dummy round just to learn the ropes, this is a very hard one to recommend. This is one that again played out way better with people, and having at least one person who had played the game before did help steer things some extent, but I'm just a little torn on it. One more quick pro for this game, it easily had the best music of the 5. It's so good. I was really struggling to score Weapons Drawn. The game stands out not just from this pack, but from everything Jackbox has done before. I wanted to turn to others from that Wholesomeverse crew to get a second opinion on what I could say here. Retromation chimed in. It is a lot on a first play, but I've always wanted more Jackbox games that feel and go deeper, putting forward that if you were to find the right group to play this one with and learn the intricacies together over time, then it could easily become someone's favorite all-time Jackbox game. I tend to agree that definitely rings true and counts for a lot. He went on to say, it seems like it has more game to it than many other Jackbox games. It's one that you will enjoy more the more you play it, compared to some of the others where it's an immediate hit of dopamine that slowly wears off. Without the ability to speak out loud and discuss, the game loses a lot of that fun social deduction madness. So once again, to the team's credit, they made a game that I feel does work nearly equally well in person or remotely, but this one is slightly edged out by in person. And it technically functions with all the available information being present for a stream, but without the live chatter, it instead becomes a bunch of people blindly making decisions in a way that never feels really influenced, or as if people are acting as a group rather than individually, and it just kind of made for an overly long game. If you play these games quite casually or over stream most of the time, I'm gonna say it's about a 5 out of 10. If you want a Jackbox game with a little more meat on its bones that you're gonna come back to over and over and you don't care about variety in your night, then heck, I don't know, I haven't played it enough to really score it with that mindset. It could be a 9 or a 10, but only a select group of people are gonna love it that much. So I probably have to score it based on the lower end. I'll give it like a 6. So time for my general wrap-up of things at the end here. Drawful Animate is another wonderful installment in one of the best games Jackbox has to offer. It's a fantastic drawing game, it's great trying to fool people, it's just fantastic all around. The Wheel is a nice way to switch up trivia. The question style is different, the setting of the game is a lot of fun. I really do still like the chance elements, but there's a lot of friction in this game in that the trivia and chance are on totally opposite sides of what people are typically looking for. You combined a skill-based game with the opposite of skill, which somewhat evens the playing field, but it either needed to be more trivia focused or more chance focused. That's just my opinion. People seem to really love this game, and it's certainly not bad. Job seems to be most people's favorites, and exists as a fun alternative to Quiplash, taking a lot of those pressures off. But if people aren't willing to put the extra effort into the icebreaker round, things totally fall apart. It's very streaming friendly, with people easily being able to play along on Twitch or join in on the audience. It's great in that regard. The poll mine is so near being my personal favorite in the pack. At the end of the day, Drawful is just kind of too good of a game, and considering most people would rather play Job, I'm gonna rather play the game that the rest of the group is most into, so it's gonna get edged out. But I do still think there's some incredible potential in the poll mine, but it's not quite there. The idea of balancing a social deduction game that doesn't force one or two people to exist in the hot seat for a stressful, anxiety-inducing 40 minutes is great. The idea of hiding letters within a picture is fantastic, but it is overly complex. It should have been simplified to be quicker and snappier, or it should have been expanded and released outside of a Jackbox Party Pack. There are people who are going to enjoy that game, and it may end up being their favorites of this pack, potentially setting aside weapons drawn nights rather than Jackbox nights. So really think hard if that game feels like it's for you, because I feel that we are quite often going to skip this one over, rather than spending the time educating someone in the room who's never played it before, and then spending half of the time we set aside on this one game. All of that adds up to a pretty decent pack, but it is still notably outshined by some of the newer packs, and still even by Jackbox 3 that has long held a top ranking spot. Funnily enough, Jackbox 3 has Quiplash instead of Job, Guespionage instead of the Poll Mine, Trivia Murder Party instead of the Wheel, TKO instead of either drawing game, and Fakin' It as their social deduction stand-in. It's very interesting the way the combination of games overlap with those two packs. I am shocked how long this video came out. These games become increasingly complex, as seemingly many of the more simple ideas have already been used up. I don't know if that's exactly why. Maybe I've just become more long-winded with time. You guys are gonna have to let me know. Is this absurd to talk about this pack for this long? Is that helpful? It makes me wonder if I need to revisit some of my old reviews, like the first ones I ever did for the Party Pack 4 or 5. Maybe relative to what I do now, those reviews are seen as lacking? It's something I would genuinely consider. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I hope this informed your purchase, and if you do decide to pick it up, I hope you have a wonderful time and enjoy each and every game. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to Jackbox for sending me an early copy of the game. Thank you to patrons for their continued support, and I hope to see you all again soon.